Welcome to ancient China. In early China, the Huanghe River Valley was the first known Chinese civilization. There, people farmed the rich soil from the Yellow River. As the civilization grew, towns were found, and the need for rulers was important. Looking at this map, I want to review some of the geography that we've talked about, with the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan Desert to the north and to the west, and the Himalaya Mountains and the Kunlun Shan Mountains, which we put on our maps, also in the west. Most of China's population lived in the greener areas, which of course is around the rivers. So as you can see, in the north is the Yellow River, or the Huanghe River, and in the southern river, the Yangtze River. Those were the two main rivers. In between that area in green was considered the Middle Kingdom, and where most of the people lived at that time period. And that is part of the Shang Dynasty. With our current study of the River Valley civilization, here is the Huanghe River once again. And remember that it was called the Yellow River, and it gets its name from the rich yellow soil that it carried from the country of Mongolia all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And remember, the other main river is called the Shang River, or the Yangtze River. This is the longest river in China, and it flows about 3,400 miles east across central China, where it empties into the Yellow Sea. China's first rulers were part of the Shang Dynasty. There are no written records of this dynasty of rulers, but archaeologists did uncover homes built partially underground with wooden poles, potter's wheels, and evidence of harvesting silk. Archaeologists can piece together clues to the early Chinese civilizations by using written records. The first civilization to create written records was the Shang Dynasty. Your mission is to journey back in time to the ancient Shang Dynasty and learn about how the Shang rulers became the first powerful dynasty in the ancient Chinese culture. Before we get started, you're going to need your graphic organizer and something to write with so that you can fill out your graphic organizer as we're proceeding through the rest of the video. So if you would take out your study guide, and we want to look at the top essential question: how did the rulers known as the Shang become powerful? Who are the leaders in our community and what gives them power? So we're going to learn why some people in early China had more power than others. And we're going to start with this dynasty because they were one of the most powerful. So if you would look at your graphic organizer and fill out the dates of the beginning of this dynasty, which is 1750 BC to about 1045 BC. So they were in power for about 600 years. The capital city of the Shang Dynasty was in the city of Anyang. And that city actually still exists today. You are going to watch a video at the end of this presentation which will show some archaeologists who have found an ancient city buried in Anyang, which gives us some hints as to how the Shang Dynasty lived their life. In this map, I want you to notice north of the Huanghe River, or the Yellow River, is Anyang, as you can see. So that is where in, I believe it was 1899, they discovered and noticed some things, strange markings on some bones, which led some archaeologists to proceed to dig around that area to see if they could find evidence. And of course, they found some things on the Shang Dynasty, which you will see in a later video. What I'd like to do is just review what the word dynasty means. A dynasty is a line of rulers who belong to the same family, usually father to son. So I think that with talking about dynasties in the last couple weeks, we understand that concept. The Chinese dynasties, I think there were about 10 on record, and so we are going to only study or talk about the first 4. So we're going to talk about the Shang Dynasty, we will talk about the Zhao Dynasty, the Qin Dynasty, and then the Han Dynasty. The people of the Shang Dynasty were divided into groups. So we are going to talk about the evidence of hierarchy or the social classes right now. So if you would take out your study guide once again, and I call your attention to the section where there is a triangle, as we know, for hierarchy, and we're going to go ahead and take some notes. So if you look at the top arrow, where it says king and his family divided the land to people called aristocrats. Of course, the most powerful group was the king and his family, and the first Shang king ruled over a small area in northern China. His armies used chariots and bronze weapons to take over nearby areas. So in time, the Shang kings ruled over much of the Huanghe River Valley. So the word aristocrat, sometimes I know that there's a Disney movie called Aristocats that students over time always call attention to that word. And honestly, if you recall, if you saw that movie before, that the Aristocats were cats who were from wealthy families. So that's where they got that name for the Disney movie for Aristocats from the word aristocrats. And that word we actually still use today, not in our country, but over in Great Britain. They still have people of great wealth, and they're called aristocrats. So, all right, let's move on. Later, the Shang kings chose warlords to govern the kingdom's territories. Warlords were military leaders who commanded their own armies. But the king controlled even larger armies who defended their kingdom's borders. So the king's armies really helped him to stay in power, because I'm sure you would say, well, what would take the warlords if they have their own armies? They could go ahead and take over the king. Well, the king obviously had bigger armies, and he made sure that he did have the biggest army. So the warlords, again, just like a dynasty or a king and his family, they would get an area of land from the king, and they would pass their land over to their sons. So they would also rent their land or sell their land however they see fit, so that they would be able to get money from their land. So as you can see, in the next group and it's the biggest group in the triangle, are our farmers. Because that there were very few people in China that were traders and artisans, because most Chinese were farmers. They had to work the land that belonged to the warlords, and they grew grains such as millet, wheat, and rice, and they raised cattle, sheep, and chickens. A small number of people were considered slaves, and that is the last category that you'll see on your triangle. So as you can see, the craftspeople is a very small section of people. With having so many people living in such a small area, they needed to depend on growing food, obviously. And so the farmers were really important. So if we think about other evidences of hierarchy, such as Egypt or other places that we've learned, like Mesopotamia, the farmers weren't quite such a large class of people. But as you can see, the farmers are very important to the Chinese River Valley people. The people of the Shang Dynasty they worshiped gods and spirits, and the spirits were believed to live in the mountains, rivers, and seas. They believed that angry spirits controlled crops, diseases, or enemy attacks. And they believed that they had to keep their spirits happy by making offerings of food and other goods. They would believe that their ancestors, people before them as your ancestor, could talk with the gods, and they were asking their ancestors many times to encourage the powerful gods of nature to be kind to humans. Shang kings would often ask their ancestors for advice. So remember, an ancestor is someone that lived their time on earth before you. So how would the priests communicate with their ancestors? You had a vocabulary word that describes how they were able to do that. The Shang also believed that angry gods and spirits might cause farmers to have a poor harvest or armies to lose a battle. So it would be very important for them to honor their ancestors also by making offerings in the hope that the ancestors would help in times of need and bring good luck. To this day, many Chinese still remember their ancestors by going to temples and burning small paper copies of food and clothing. So they actually don't burn real clothing and food, but they'll take paper copies of that and they'll do that to speak to their ancestors in our world today. If you look at your study guide, I would like for you to now answer the question or the statement, describe the Shang religion. So you may want to stop the video at some point or go back and rewind so you have the information that we just talked about as far as the Shang Dynasty believing in gods and goddesses and keeping their ancestors happy. Shang kings believed that they received power and wisdom from the gods, the spirits, and their ancestors. Shang religion and government were closely linked, just as they were in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. An important duty of Shang kings was to contact the gods, the spirits, and ancestors before making those important decisions. As you know from your vocabulary word, the way they did this was through the use of oracle bones. And we know that animal bones were used to tell the future. So if you want to look at the picture, I know that some of you actually put this as your image for your vocabulary. You can see some of the early written Chinese language on the bone. And so we are going to learn here shortly on how they would be able to read those markings. So the question is, how did the priests and the kings tell the future using oracle bones? If you look at your graphic organizer, the question, how did the kings tell the future? We're going to talk about that. So you want to maybe stop the video at some time and take some notes. So the kings asked for the gods' help by using oracle bones, as we know. They had the priests scratch questions on the oracle bones, and maybe some of the questions could be, will I win the battle? Will I recover from my illness? Or any other questions that the king felt that they needed some help from the gods. So then these bones were heated. Usually they placed hot metal rods inside the bones, and that's what caused them to crack. So the priest told the king then what the gods had written in the cracks. So it really wasn't the king who read the cracks, it was the priests. And they believed that the pattern of the cracks formed answers from the gods. And so the priests, once again, interpreted these answers and wrote them down for the kings. So scratches on oracle bones are the earliest known examples of Chinese writing. So then the king had records of all the gods' answers. I'd like to take a pause right now, and I want you to refer to your study guide because I'd like for you to answer a question about what you think and giving your opinion to the question below. And who do you think had more power during the Shang Dynasty, the king or the priests? I would like for you to give some supporting details to justify your opinion one way or the other. So if you think the king had more power, give me some reasons why. Or if you thought the priests had more power, give me some reasons why. It doesn't have to be very long, but I would like for you to answer one way or the other. The scratches on the oracle bone show how today's Chinese writing began. However, the modern Chinese language is much more complex. So we're going to refer to your graphic organizer and answer what were some of the important things the Shang people wrote in their early language. So if you need to take time and stop your video so that you have this important information. The people of the Shang period used writing to keep tax records, record building plans, record army orders, or to make treaties with their enemies, and also to keep track of the tribute that they used to pay dead people at their funerals. So obviously the tribute would be paid by the family. As you know from your vocabulary words that some of the early Chinese language started as pictographs, and these were characters that stand for objects. So 2 or more were used to stand for objects. So we're going to take a look at some pictographs, and I'd like for you to refer to your graphic organizer and take some guesses. If you look at these early Shang pictographs, I'm going to ask you to record your answers on your study guide. Of course, you're going to be taking a guess. So we're going to start with the top one on the left-hand side. So if that would be number 1, so if you would write down what you think that stands for, and then move on to the one next to it will be number 2. The one in the bottom left-hand corner will be number 3. And the last one on the bottom right-hand corner will be number 4. So we're going to go over these in class and we'll see if you are correct. So another word that you worked on this week was ideographs, and that is something that represents 2 or more pictographs. So if we took 2 pictographs and put them together, it would make an ideograph. So if you think of our written language today, perhaps a phrase would be an example of an ideograph. So we're going to see if you can guess what the ideograph is on our next slide. So this is an example of an ideograph, and obviously if you look at it, the answer is someone offering someone to drink a drink. Maybe that's not what we would guess because that does not look like a face at all. But if you were looking at this, this would be an example of what an ideograph is. And I think that some of you, without looking at the answer first, probably could have guessed something like this. The people of the Shang Dynasty developed many skills. So the farmers produced silk, which weavers used to make colorful clothes. And so the Chinese were the only people that made silk, and they originated from silkworms, which we're going to learn at a later time. So artisans made vases and dishes from fine white clay, and they also carved statues from ivory, which is white, and a green stone called jade. Some of you might know what jade is. It looks like a milky green color, and so you would see sometimes jade statues. That would be from the ancient dynasty. The Shang are best known for their works of bronze. So to make something in bronze, the artisans made clay molds, maybe like you would make in art class, and then when they molded what they needed, they would pour the bronze inside the mold, and when the bronze cooled, they would remove the mold, and that would make sculptures, vases, drinking cups, and urns, and they would be able to use those eventually to trade with people from other cultures. So the Shang used bronze urns to prepare and serve food for rituals that honored their ancestors. So you want to refer to your study guide and you want to write some accomplishments that influence the Shang culture, which would be some of their inventions. Another Shang invention changed the way people ate their food, and I'm sure perhaps you can guess what this important invention is. You guessed it, chopsticks. So when the Chinese began to follow Confucius, who was a Chinese thinker that we're going to talk about, they were not allowed to use utensils that look like weapons because Confucius preaches nonviolence. So chopsticks were associated with peacefulness. So many of you that still use chopsticks today, you can tell your family that the Shang Dynasty, which is the early Chinese dynasty, invented the chopsticks. So one of the last things in your study guide is to make a connection, and what I'd like for you to do is make a connection to either Mesopotamia or Egypt. Since our study of Mesopotamia, we have discussed how river valleys have influenced the start of ancient civilization. So you can look back on your study guide. I want you to make a connection between the Huanghe River Valley, which we've just talked about, and other river valleys in Mesopotamia or Egypt that we have studied so far this year. So how are they similar? I think we could look at our 5 characteristics of a civilization and we can compare some things such as evidence of hierarchy. We can talk about religion, we can talk about government, we can talk about writing. We can't really talk about monumental architecture yet, but we can use the other 4 evidence of hierarchy, writing, religion, and government to make some connections with Mesopotamia and Egypt. So if you need to use your notebook that's in your folder to look back at some things, you can go ahead and make some connections there. I'm asking for at least 4 or 5 different connections on your study guide for full credit. So this might be something that you do for homework. This will be due by next week, probably in the middle of the week. I'll be asking you to hand in your study guides. Okay, guys, well, great job taking notes and listening to me talk on and on about the Shang Dynasty. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to ask you to log back onto Schoology and look for the video, The Lost City of Shang. This isn't a very long video, but I'd like for you to take a look at what some archaeologists discovered about the ancient Shang Dynasty. So you're going to be answering some questions on your study guide. It's at the end of the study guide, and about what they found at the burial site, and so what their ancestors believed in. So if you could perhaps look at the questions first, and as you watch the video, then it would be much easier to figure out what answers you need. So when you are finished with your study guide, please hand it in to me, and then I will get it back to you. I am going to grade your completion of the study guide, so if you need to rewind part of the video and watch what you didn't get the first time or you don't understand, we are going to go over just a few things in class I'm going to highlight with you. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So I appreciate your attention, and the next dynasty we're going to be looking at is the Zhou Dynasty.